This is humanity's last stand against the death that has come for them.
The idea of doing anything that was 45-minute non-stop battle to me was terrifying, because battle fatigue. We couldn't just have a battle. We had to follow the characters through the story.
Anyone will tell you that was the hardest episode of TV anyone in this show has done.
We had 11 weeks of night shooting. That was quite a feat for any crew to go through, because you literally become vampires.
I mean, we must have broken records in some way, even just broken, like, human working records.
I said to my guys, you know, you might not want to do it again, but you won't regret doing it the first time.
It's a real testament to the entire Belfast crew, who gave us something that no amount of money could ever buy.
We've been building towards this for so long now. You think back to the very beginning of the very first episode, and it's Beyond the Wall, where the White Walkers are stalking a group of Rangers. This is the culmination of one of the key storylines in the whole show.
We sat in the writer's room with a massive diagram of Winterfell. It was like a football locker room. We had a white marker, and we went through saying, foes here, foes move there, what defense would you have here? And we kind of just worked out the strategy.
We need to break up where we're shooting and what it looks like, so that we feel marked differences between the different locations, even though it's all essentially happening in Winterfell.
We've never been in anything but a pretty small fraction of Winterfell. We knew that, especially for episode 803, we were going to need a lot more Winterfell than we've ever had before, because the entire episode takes place in Winterfell, and you have 19 or 20 principal characters all involved in a very chaotic situation. Deb knew she needed to at least double the size of Winterfell.
We needed to create a different gate. We needed to feel like, as the script dictated, that Winterfell was surrounded.
The main consideration for Winterfell was just to make it much more visual, to fill the frame better.
This has been not the case with the entire series. It has grown from this kind of small event into this massive thing that is reflected in the story.
You can't expect the set to look the way it's necessarily described in the script. There's a certain amount you have to fill in with your imagination. They filled it all in for us.
In David Nutter's words, he was, in the early episodes, building Winterfell up so Miguel could knock it down. And the thing that was really important to us was working out how Winterfell would close itself down. What steps would the residents of Winterfell take in order to protect themselves against the army of the dead? One of the things that was hit upon quite early was dragonglass, and how would the residents use dragonglass in order to protect themselves.
The living do have some time to prepare for this battle, and one of the things they know going into it is that they're going to be outnumbered, and another thing they know is that the Whites don't like fire and dragonglass, so they're trying to use those weapons as best they can. It's lining the walls in the way that you might see a security wall topped with broken glass in our world. It's also in the courtyard in case the walls do get breached, to try to prevent the Whites from completely flooding.
They'd done all that they could with dragonglass, but nothing they would do would ever be enough.
We knew this episode was going to be almost entirely battle. That can get really boring really quickly if you're not careful. Part of what we cared about a lot here was getting Miguel on board.
I think that we went to Miguel because Miguel had had some of the most challenging battle sequences, and he had done them brilliantly. He was going to set himself the challenge of not repeating himself, a way of looking at the action sequences that would distinguish them from the other sequences and actually bring out something in the drama.
One of the ways we could keep this being interesting is not make it a battle per se. The way that you would normally imagine a battle. It usually has a beginning, a middle, and an ending. We know we need that. But what we also were trying to do was to give each act a genre.
It's kind of a cross between action set pieces and horror movie.
Fairly early on, I had a good idea of what I wanted it to be, because obviously the tricky thing with Act 3 is it's all at night time. And we kind of developed the idea of, playing a lot in darkness, seeing less and hearing and feeling more than necessarily seeing it.
And this is just my own personal feeling. I didn't find the Whites scary anymore. They're the monster, so in a way you need them to be scary, and we need them to not just be zombies, and we need them to feel like they're something other. From that emerged this idea, firstly, of What if we don't see them until they actually are right in front of us? The only way we could think to do that is I thought of the horror movie convention of if you're in a haunted house in the middle of nowhere and the only light that emanates from that field is that house itself and everything else drops into darkness, it makes what would by day be just another meadow or town or whatever it is, it gives it an ominous feeling. Having a steep drop off into darkness where we would not be able to see the scale of the army that was coming in to attack us emerged out of that. I think it's the first 20 minutes. You don't get to see the monster at all you do is hear them. And I think for me that was one of the most scary ideas, because what if it didn't work?
Shooting at night hides a multitude of sins in terms of a battle. It did expand. I think we never thought it was going to take quite as long, although during the prep period it became obvious that the episode was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
As soon as we did get that outline, I thought, this is not what we had imagined at all. Because it has wights and dragons, fire and night work, 11 weeks of it.
It was something that you didn't want to focus on too much, you just treat it day by day, tick it off.
It's always more difficult for the crew than it is for the actors. It just speaks to the quality and the hard work that goes into this show.
That's the most amazing thing about our crew, is that David and Dan write it down and then we all try to figure it out.
The scene that I've seen it many, many times, but as we get more finished shots, it really gives me a tingle, is when the Dothraki and Jorah first charge into the darkness and the big trebuchets are firing.
From a set deck perspective, we were involved with the catapults and trebuchets with armory. So Tommy provided a couple of practical trebuchets, and then we had 3 or 4 made that were background ones.
The trebuchet is a very, very large centrifugal throwing arms. I like to build everything that is practical and we can actually get the projectile to fire. We went about maybe 30 meters, which is a good distance. Not in the historical reference, it'd be a waste of time. That wouldn't get you very far. But the fact that it still throw the projectile, it would still do all the action and everything could be done in camera. Once it left the trebuchet, then obviously visual effects will take over.
The more real stuff you can have in the frame, and the less you have to lean on your facilities or your visual effects houses to give you digital things or CG elements, CG flame, CG mist, CG smoke, the better off you are.
Over the 11-week period, that's a lot of smoke, a lot of changes in weather, a lot of equipment, a lot of crew to cover all of that. We had multiple wind machines, which we had to move every shot. We had multiple smoke machines, which we also had to move from every shot, every setup. Along with the snow as well, we had foam snow, we had paper snow, we had handheld snow guns, we had all sorts of things, just trying to surround every part of the action.
The fog of war sequence, the whole point is nobody knows where anybody is. Everyone underestimated how powerful, how brutal this attack was going to be. They lasted a fraction of the time they thought they were going to last. All of these are reasons for us to feel the chaos of that particular moment.
My goodness, it was overwhelming. You're on this huge set. It's filled with smoke. It feels like maybe 1,000 people on the set with extras, crew, and cast.
Death and horror coming from places you'd never imagined. Every time you think, oh, now there's a little break, and you realize, no, there's no break. It's just a crazy onslaught.
It all just starts to fall apart, and decisions have to start being made on the fly. And that's all mixed in with the stuff of like, who am I doing this for? Who am I sacrificing my family for?
It was important to see how difficult that decision was for Grey Worm to make. As soon as he pulls the rope on that trench, he knows that every one of his men he's never going to see again.
He makes a choice, but it can tell that his heart is grieving as he does so.
To read the word trench on the page doesn't sound like anything, but it took such a lot of work to try and resolve it to a point that it was a convincing method of defence. Originally, it was planned at 50 feet outside the Winterfell main gate. I think it ended up more like 80 feet. And that was a big job between art department and special effects, so it was us and Sam's team.
The complicated process of the trenches began with the concept of it being a first line of defence. Therefore, it had to be, impressive, had to be very big because of hundreds of thousands of whites attacking. We can't have real logs in there because it's burning pretty much every night for 6 weeks. It has to be a steel thing, come up with a technique for igniting all these troughs, so you have a nice wave of fire igniters.
We put 5 different cameras on it because we knew we were only going to be able to do this a couple of times just because of the nature of it. And we'd figured out where all those 5 different cameras would need to be, and the special effects team did a great job of sort of getting that thing to light up. We'd sync the camera move to exactly the speed of how it was going to light up, and it worked really well.
For a long time, Miguel always mentioned hell to me. This episode is just turning into hell for each character. A nice moment to introduce that would be when the trench goes up, which on the one hand for our antagonist is almost a saving moment because the trench eventually keeps the army of the dead away from them, but at the same time it actually turns image-wise into hell.
We wanted them to feel, and at least in that moment, maybe this is all going to work out. Maybe things are all going to be okay. Those kinds of moments, those moments of hope, help emotionally shape the episode because it gives it somewhere to go when the hope is thwarted and things go the wrong way. And we thought that would help us with the episode as a whole, in addition to providing us with a visually memorable moment.
For the actual battle itself, Dani's impatient to get in there. She's like gunning for a fight. She's ready to take this guy down. She's a fierce warrior, although you don't really see a lot of hand-to-hand combat with her, and she knows how to fight to the death, especially at this point. There's a lot of anger. She's got all of that in her to put into this fight, so it's not just the matter at hand, but I think because of everything on an emotional level that's gone on, she's able to go into her cold-blooded side.
The Night King has exhibited various powers over this series, and one of the things that we know the dead bring with them is the weather, and part of it is just battle tactics. The 2 dragons are probably our hero's best chance of winning this fight. So it's very much a conscious choice by the Night King to neuter his opponent's greatest weapon.
Dragon fighting was one of the most exciting things that we had on the table, and it was also one of the most difficult things that we had on the table. It was a definite group effort.
When you're creating something that hasn't been seen before, like 3 dragons having a fight in midair, it takes a lot of imagination. It takes looking at whatever reference you can possibly call up. What do birds of prey look like when they're going at it against one another?
It's sort of an aerial dragon dogfight. So originally the whole thing was just in this storm, and then, we came up with the idea of let's get them up out of the storm, above the clouds.
The VFX boys, first of all, are brilliant. That buck is amazing. First time you go on it, you're like, this is awesome. Very hard to stay concentrated because you go in, you do like 10 minutes of a move, and then you go back to your trailer for like 45 minutes. And that's not, that sounds like an ideal day, but it's not actually what you want to be doing. You want, in some ways, as an actor, to be like the cold face, just sort of staying there, staying in the moment. Otherwise, your energy goes. So I found it really tough.
Whenever we have a shot where the dragons need to breathe fire, we want to simulate as best as possible the light effect from that fire and how it interacts with the characters and the actors in that scene and the environment. Where the dragon fire is going is moving, so we're trying to create the effect of the light moving from one place to another. That just really helps sell the believability of all that dragon fire.
We had the big flamethrower on the spider cam on stage that was shooting 40 feet of fire as fast as we could do it. We had a robot arm that moves as fast as you want. So for Assyrian, when he's blasting John, he's so damaged by this point, so he's leaking fire. We actually did laser cuts from the digital model of those openings, and then bronze casts were made and then fitted with fire jets, so that the fire would interact with those surfaces properly, and then that was put onto this robot with the quick arm, and then the camera was also on a motion control rig too. And then we had a fire rig on the techno crane on the stage in our element shooting. And we had, it was either 6 or 8 weeks of solid element shooting.
One of the most challenging shots in episode 3 is when the direction of battle is switching and Jon Snow goes back to the castle, and Miguel saw it as a one-er. We actually shot it in a series of shots which will be cut together in the end, but one of the biggest ones is when we travel through the courtyard extensively.
Kid's very aware of the camera, and he's very good at finding his marks and finding different positions that are required.
I had to always keep track of where I was in the fight, who I was following, what I was doing. It felt much more complicated than the battles.
We needed Jon to make his way through the courtyard and bear witness to all of the characters that we know and we care about, that he knows and he cares about, dying, essentially being overwhelmed, and for him to have to stay on track, to know that the reason he's there is to get the Night King and that humanity depends on that choice.
It wasn't so much about showing any single storyline as it was getting the sense of them all mixed into this chaos together and thinking that the chaos was going to wash over them and consume them.
It's physically challenging, it's physically demanding. I mean, we were shooting a scene that, I probably never looked cooler in my entire life. I was stood upon a pile of bodies, fending off whites.
And the funny thing was that we said to the stunt guys, and there were like about 15 of them attacking me at the same time, and they said, if you manage to get me down, take me down. I had to fight for real. And it was extremely intense and extremely exhausting. I saw some of the footage and I think it looks real, because it is real.
The prop team have been very, very busy. I don't think they'll want to see another mound of dead bodies for a very long time.
Rob Cameron and Gavin Jones came up with the idea of moulding these bodies into these discs. So, the on-set crew would be able to pick the discs up, move them around, and each disc would have maybe 5 bodies sort of moulded onto it. That was a piece of genius, really, and allowed us to get through the season with much greater efficiency, a much less painful sort of process in order to build up the feeling of the war dead in a way that we hadn't been able to achieve before.
Another challenge is that we not only build these massive sets, but nothing stayed the same. Every night the team would meet, and tomorrow this is what has to happen. What has to be snowed, what has to be cleared, what dead bodies do we have, which dead bodies do we have, are they fresh dead?
We knew that in the episode that at some point the Night King was going to resurrect the dead. But in doing so, there's obviously all the cadavers and bodies which are in these tombs in the crypt, which would rise as well at the same time.
Nobody thought of that. He's bringing all the dead people back to life, and they put the women and children in a crypt with all the dead people.
For us, that was exciting because it was going to be a brand new challenge. We referenced ancient mummies, we looked at corpses and skeletal figures.
It was scary, because all the stunt guys that play the dead guys, they're in full, brilliant makeup, and they're around dark corners. You don't fully know where they're all coming from.
Shooting in the crypt was a lot of fun, actually. It was the first for me seeing White Walkers. The whole action was really fun because I never get to do any action. We were running around, Tyrion and I. We felt like action stars, even though we probably ran like 5 meters.
That's not a set. That place really exists. It's terrifying down there. So it's kind of great. You have all this epic battle going on upstairs, and then this genuine, horror movie down below.
It was one of the scariest days of my life.
Winterfell is kind of the home for the show, and one of the things that always struck us as a horrific aspect of this is that these hallways and rooms where we spend a lot of good times with characters that we care about has now become a horror set because it's been invaded by undead. We couldn't imagine a better protagonist for that horror sequence than Arya. Partly because we care about her so much, but partly because she's the one in the midst of it.
We pick her up after being hit and taking the fall and running off. She's in a really bad way and in a lot of pain. And I guess what I was trying to play was like trying to play the drive to keep on and keep pushing on and keep going, but also this insane fear of like, what have I got myself into? What am I doing?
So the library in Winterfell was something that I was very excited about designing.
That was heavily influenced by the director Miguel Sapochnik, who wanted to have a, two-tiered room where the whites could look down.
He really wanted to be creating almost like a horror movie in there as well, to be able to build the suspense, to be able to go inside from shadow to light, and to be able to pace her around that room.
I took Maisie in there, and we were going to have 9 whites or something in there, and I gave them all a path, and then I told her she had to make her way through it without being seen. And we figured out this whole choreographed piece where everything was a near miss.
Usually every time that I've been running as Arya, I've been very focused and like head down, like running as fast as I can. And for this one, it was more of a like desperate scramble through the corridors and not being able to think clearly enough to make a plan until she's saved by Beric.
As soon as we first saw Beric in the 3rd season, we started talking to each other about like, well, why this guy? And it was always important for us that Beric have a reason, and that reason be fulfilled before he dies.
When Beric tries to let Arya get away, he's trying to hold himself up, but he's also trying to stop the whites getting to her. And when I saw that, I really had a lump in my throat. I was just kind of proud of the character for being so brave.
Realizing that they are sacrificing themselves for her, and realizing that she is here for a reason, and Beric clearly knows that. It's not until she sees Melisandre and business mode comes back again, and she realizes that this is what she has to do and this is what she was meant to do.
What do we say to the god of death?
Not today.
One of the great things about having this many people you care about in an episode and in a sequence together is that sleight of hand becomes a little bit easier, I hope, where you can pull people's attention and focus to people that they care about a lot, like Jon and like Dany, Theon and Bran, not to mention Tyrion and Sansa in the crypt. So hopefully you have so many places that your attention's pulled, you forget about the fact that Arya Stark ran out of that castle with the battle drums playing.
As was discussed in episode 2, the battle plan is to lure the Night King out, and so that means that Bran is the bait, and he's in the very center of Winterfell and the Godswood. The reason the Godswood was chosen is because it's such an iconic location, but it's also the weirwood tree has long been a source of power for Bran in particular.
Just when you think that it's all over, and just when you think that Jon Snow's gonna be the hero again, Arya appears through the mist. Shooting that was tedious, but so great to be able to perform all these different beats within maybe like 2 seconds of footage.
She does jump out of nowhere, and that's a wire rig. It's a wire rig we did on the location, but the location wasn't ideal. It was really hard to get a crane in there, and we've obviously got the weirwood tree, which is basically condemned. It's all held together with wires. So it was tricky to do it there, and we did a version of it there, but then we had to redo it because it didn't have the ability to control it as much as we'd hoped, and it needed to be a real boom out of nowhere moment.
We did a lot of just testing, her flying through the air, making it look exactly how they wanted it to in the shot. And so my role in that was doing just all the testing for it. And then by the time we got that dialed in, we brought Maisie in to do a few jumps, and once she felt comfortable, she was in costume and did that on the day.
Maisie does almost all this stuff on her own. She has an excellent stunt woman for the dangerous stuff, but most of it's actually Maisie. And learning how to do these various tricks with the knife and learning how to flip the knife from one hand to the other. Once we saw how well she could do it in that moment with Brienne, we thought this is the way it's going to end against the Night King.
I'm really proud of myself. I'm proud of everyone. I'm proud of the work that was put in, and I'm grateful that it was me and not Kit.
I was pissed that it wasn't me killing the Night King. I would have given you I'd have bet you thousands.
I think it's probably 3 years now or something we've known that it was going to be Arya who delivers that fatal blow to the exact spot where the Child of the Forest put the Dragonglass blade to create the Night King, and he is uncreated by the Valyrian steel.
That's such a nice little full circle thing as well, that that's the knife that was destined to kill Bran, and here it is saving him.
He's the king on the chessboard, and when the king is toppled, the game is over. It doesn't matter how many pieces you have left. And so we wanted to show that, and we wanted to see where each of our characters were in these moments. So it's kind of radiating outwards from the Godswood.
At the end of that whole fight, there's this moment, and then they all drop. They call it de-animation. They just de-animated. That was so impressive, because usually when you see this in a movie, most of it is CGI. But here, so much, it's been camera, it's real.
I'd be excited enough just watching that happen on screen and thinking, wow, what a great ending, but actually getting to be there and react to that as Bran is pretty special.
At the end of it, it's a victory for the living, but at great cost, because some of our favorite characters fall.
Jorah's entire life has been building up to this moment. His ultimate redemption is to give his life for the woman he loves and the woman he betrayed. And we knew that that scene in his hands would be fantastic.
All he ever wanted to do was to fight to protect her. And if he could have chosen a way to die, this is how he would have chosen to die.
My favorite scene to shoot was my demise. When I read it, I just thought, yeah, of course, of course.
Holding him for the first time, she finally sees what she has closed her eyes to this whole time. And it's too late. You gotta go to your own depths to bring out that.
It's really hard to fake that kind of pure grief like that, and Emilia just really brought it in those moments. I think part of it was because she and Ian have been working together for so long, and it's all coming to an end.
We've been with these characters for so many years. We've been like to hell and back with them. It gets to a point where like it sounds crazy, but it's not a huge amount of acting.
There are a few moments in the final season where characters are saying things to each other that we don't hear, and that's very much by design. And I think Dan and I both had ideas of what he's trying to say, but we're never gonna hear those words.
We knew that episode 3 was pretty much an episode-long battle sequence. And we certainly felt exhausted by the time we were done, but that is sort of the idea of the entire episode, that you're in it with these people and you're in an impossible situation with these people. And by the end, you should feel some small fraction of the exhaustion that they feel after having endured this experience.
By the end, for Grey Worm, and I think for a lot of the characters, it's just exhaustion on a different level.
I loved every second of that. The torture and the brutality and the horror that you see in our faces is real.
It was hard and it was bloody, and I must say that I'm impressed that we made it happen.
Kudos to the crew. I don't think I've seen people work as hard as they have. Like, it's amazing the work they have done. I mean, it's a cliche, but it really couldn't have been done without them.
I've said it before, I will say it again. We have the hardest working crew in the industry, full stop.
At the helm of it, we have Miguel, who is extraordinary at shaping these incredible action sequences. And without him, that whole episode would have just crumbled. It never would have got done.
There were so many people involved in this, and there was so much thought that went into every single section. You know, it physically hurt to make that show. In television, this has probably never been done before, and it's probably never going to get done again.